Well, I really appreciated Mike covering for me last Sunday. It's always nice to be able to go out of town and to know that you guys are going to be well taken care of. I know he did a great job, and I appreciate Mike sharing with us and using his gifts to bless us from the pulpit. I wanted to give you a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm very excited about a sermon series I'm going to start coming up in September. There's this question. One time I was polling my youth group when I was in youth ministry back in Nashville, and I polled the youth group just to ask them, is there anything at all you'd be interested in hearing lessons about? Is there anything you'd be interested in learning about? And I remember one of my young men, he was about 11th grade, and he said, what does it actually mean that Jesus died on the cross for me? Have you ever really thought about that question? What does it actually mean? What was accomplished? Something that happened to one person 2,000 years ago. How does that event carry significance for me? And over the centuries, as Christians have wrestled with that topic, that situation, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, in some ways, it's been relative to a person's circumstances in life, the different angle that they bring as they look at the cross and the value of the cross. So I'm going to be doing a series for the fall where we're going to be wrestling together with that question of what does it actually mean that Jesus died on the cross? And my hope is that you'll find it to be a series that's both informative but more so encouraging, that we find some different angles to look at the meaning of Jesus and what it is that he's done for us. But what I'm going to start today, for the next few weeks, I'm going to be starting a series that I'm calling Realign. Realign. A lot of us are in times of transition right now. Maybe you're transitioning from the summer back into the school year, from vacation back into a time of work. For some of you, you're transitioning from one grade to the next grade. Maybe your family has just transitioned here and you were at one place and now you're at this place. Some of you have recently experienced the loss of family members and you're trying to transition through what is it going to be like to be our family now that things are a little bit different. And so, I feel like a lot of times when you're already in a period of transition, there's some benefit to trying to make it a healthy transition. Does that make sense? If things are already changing, always a good idea to try and figure out, how do I maximize the benefit of this time of transition in my life? And so I wanted to speak to you for a few weeks on this topic of how do we realign our spiritual lives in such a way that we can connect with God more deeply. And I'd like to think that while you're already transitioning, maybe there will be some things that you can incorporate to help you align yourselves spiritually in a healthy way. One thing I wanted to do too as I get started, there are a couple of men who have really influenced me a lot in the way that I think about these topics. One of them is Randy Harris. Randy is a professor at ACU, and he was my preacher growing up. And it's like the more I go through life and the more opportunity I have to interact with Randy, the more I'm impressed by just how deeply that man impacted my thinking about Christian spirituality. The other is Landon Saunders. He's not someone I really knew about up until just a few years ago, but I've had numerous opportunities in recent years to kind of sit at his feet and listen to him talk about healthy faith, healthy Christianity. For many, many years, he was the host of the Heartbeat radio program. And so I wanted to mention those two because a lot of the ideas that I'm going to be sharing, in some way, those guys have helped kind of influence in my thinking. And I figure rather than stop 20 times and give you guys footnotes as I preach, I'd rather just say up front that if either of those two were to listen in, they'd hear some stuff they've probably said before. But I wanted to spend with you 3 weeks talking about realigning ourselves. In this first lesson, we're going to talk about the importance of learning to be still. To help us do that, I want to invite you to think about what I consider to be one of the most stressful days ever described in Scripture. If your ancestors had been in slavery for more than 400 years, I'm sure that any of us would be elated at the possibility to be freed from slavery, to transition out of slavery, to move towards freedom, to move towards property of our own, to move towards something that was new and different, not just more miserable labor, but something that was fresh and hopeful. But this situation for the Israelites coming out of Egyptian slavery, what we see is that it was actually going to get a little bit worse before it got better. Now, it was wonderful to be freed, and this passage we're going to look at today, this is coming after God sent the plagues on the Egyptians, after the death of the firstborn. This is after the time that Pharaoh said, okay, finally, I give up. You guys can go worship your God. I'll let you be free. This is coming after he has released them Moses leads them out of Egypt. One important detail it mentions is that they actually took the bones of Joseph with them. This is a thing that Joseph had requested many, many years ago. When you leave this place, because one day you will, take my bones with you. I want my bones to rest in the home of my forefathers. And so as they start to make their exit out of Egypt, there's a few details that you could easily pass over. For one, sometimes people would question, why is it that they took that path into the wilderness? And the answer is actually given to us in the text. It was God's idea. God said, I'm going to lead them into the wilderness because the normal route that people take would take them right next to Philistine territory. They're coming fresh out of slavery. They got no weapons. They have really nothing at all. So if they went by that route, they're going to get spooked. They're probably going to be afraid, and they would turn right around and head back to Egypt because they'd be afraid of war. So instead, Moses, I'm going to lead them out here into the wilderness to the middle of nowhere. And we're going to take a very, we're going to take a very strange path to the place that I'm leading you. And so what happens as a result of this too, which God also was anticipating, is that when Pharaoh saw the path they were taking, he says, these people are absolutely stupid. Why would they go that route? Nature itself is going to fence them in, and they're going to be like sitting ducks. So God said, I'm going to let Pharaoh see that happen. I'm going to harden his heart. And then he's going to come after them, and somehow through the things that Pharaoh does, I'm going to end up being glorified through this. So God gave Moses the whole game plan as they're making their way out. And at the time God is leading them, it says the angel of the Lord is there leading, but then also God is present in some kind of a strange pillory cloud formation that at night turns into this pillar of fire, this very strange formation, but nonetheless something that felt supernatural. So the people would just follow along behind the cloud as God led them. And sure enough, not long after they get outside, even though Pharaoh in the moment had been tense and had given in and had told them they could go, he and all his leaders started having what I like to call emancipation remorse. They realized that they had set those people free, but then all of a sudden you start saying, well, who's going to do our major building projects? I don't want to have to pay for that. What about all this free labor we used to have? And they start saying, I think this was a bad economic decision. And so they start pursuing them. He gets 600 of his best chariots and all the other chariots he could find, and they just take off in a run, catching up to the Israelites. So again, this very, very stressful day was the day that the Egyptians caught up to the Israelites. They caught them. They caught up with them. And you know, as he starts running up, the people begin to say to Moses, Moses, you realize that back in Egypt there were graves, right? Like we could have been buried back there without having to die this way. Why would you bring us all the way out here to the wilderness just to see us be slaughtered? So as they see the chariots approaching, they're going into panic mode. This is a stressful time. And it's about at that moment where God tells Moses, well, here, you're going to wave your hand over the Red Sea, and I'm going to divide the waters, and things are going to be okay. But meanwhile, just as the Egyptians and their chariots are catching up, that pillar of cloud and fire moved from the front of the Israelites to the back of the Israelites, and it formed a protective barrier. And it says the angel of the Lord also went to the back to protect the Israelites. But just the same, another detail of this that we misrepresent in the movies, like I absolutely loved that cartoon version, The Prince of Egypt. There's that inspiring moment where Moses steps into the water and he puts his staff down and the water just goes whoosh. But like, that's not how it happened. What Scripture says is that Moses waved his hand over the water, and it took all night for that east wind to finish drying off the ground in the middle. So as the waters start to wall up on the sides, can you imagine being there with your spouse, with your children, and you have got the equivalent of Pharaoh's SEAL Team 6 and his Army Rangers, and they've got their scopes pointed at your 2-year-old, and they are just ready to pounce on you if it weren't for that one little cloudy wall in the way, which you have no control over, right? You didn't make that thing appear. You don't know for sure that it won't just disappear, and you've got to wait all night while this strange wind blows, and gradually, the ground starts drying up. You have no time, you have no resources, you have no ideas, and ultimately in this situation, there would be nothing you could even contribute to the solution. You're not a soldier, you've been a slave all your life. You don't have any weapons. What are you going to do? And so, this is a bigger problem than any of them could have fixed on their own or even contributed to. But as you know, in this story, God, of course, provides the way out. He does make the Red Sea become like dry ground. They're able to walk across in the middle of it. And as God deals with the Egyptian army, he does it in two phases. Phase one is as the Egyptians start to take off after the Israelites, and they also go into that dry ground at the bottom of the Red Sea, God starts messing with all their chariots. So the wheels start coming loose, and it says they can't steer, and it's just really uncomfortable. And then, of course, with Moses' help, God commands the waters come crashing down, and at that point it says the Israelites could see all the dead bodies of those soldiers lying on the shore. God completely fixed that situation. But my favorite passage from this story is the one that Zach read for us just a few moments ago. In Exodus chapter 14 and verse 13. This is right at that moment when God told Moses what he was going to do, and they see the chariots approaching, and they're not sure what's about to happen. This is what Moses said to the people of God in their most stressful time. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." It's not easy to do in that moment, is it? The Lord will fight for you. There's nothing you need to do. You just need to be still and let God work on this problem. We like control. It's pretty hard to give up control, but in that moment, that's all you can do, is you have to trust God. In general, I think it's fair to say that our culture operates out of what I would call a deficit mentality. This deficit mindset. No matter what's going on, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough resources, and we stay in this perpetual anxious cycle of always feeling like we're out of something. So what might that look like on a Sunday morning? It might start off that morning where you say, hey, hurry up, we're running late to church. And then you get to church and you say, hey, song leader, hurry up, we're starting 2 minutes late, get up there and get going. And right now you're thinking, Mark, hurry up and finish, we got lunch after this. And then you're going to go to the restaurant and say, waitress, hurry up, bring my food, I've got stuff I got to do when I get home. And then you get home and you say, hurry up, I've got things I've got to do. We got to get to bed. We got to get up in the morning. And then you get in the car and you say, hey, get out of the way. I've got to get to, there's this ongoing, it never lets up, does it? If you let yourself get caught up in that, and it's like, we just need to take a few moments and, right? It's easy to stay in that anxious place. Do we actually believe that the world is going to stop spinning if we don't keep barking at it to move? Well, we act that way sometimes, don't we? Like if I don't make the world keep turning, something may go wrong. The world's been here a lot longer than we have, and until Christ comes back, it'll probably last a lot longer than we will. It's okay to pull back, to be still. What makes that anxiety problem worse is that we're absolutely connected to the people around us. I fully believe that I could walk into a crowded room almost anywhere full of Americans who are all stressed like this, and you just start saying, come on, everybody, hurry up, we got to do it, we're late, and everyone will just start panicking. You wouldn't even need to give them a reason why, would you? We just kind of stay in that mode. We're perpetually stretched out, and just like ripples in the water, when one person gets stressed, I see them stressed, and I think, well, maybe I ought to get stressed. If they're stressed, they may know something that I don't, so I might as well go ahead and start worrying about it. I can't imagine a situation more stressful than what the Israelites were in, seeing their enemies just a few feet away, ready to murder them, with some cloud as their only protection, waiting all night for those waters to be moved out of the way. But the word of Moses to them, do you want to see God's deliverance in your life? Would you like to see God work in your life? Don't be afraid. Stand firm. That problem you think is such a big problem today, in fact, you're never even going to see it again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 46, and there's a little part of it we quote often. It's written by the sons of Korah, and as I read over the words of Psalm 46, I'm convinced they could have been just imagining that scenario by the Red Sea. There's several components of this psalm that kind of align with that story. And I don't know about you, but there have been several times in my life where as I've read those words, it almost feels like God wrote that one just for me. But I want to read through this, and I want you to read it with me and see if it resonates with you. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice, the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, here's the verse you know, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress." Be still. In your time of trouble, you do have help. Be still. Set your weapons down. Just because there's a battle doesn't mean you have to fight it. Be still. God is with you. You're not going to fall. He has you in his hand. You're not going to stumble. God's going to sustain you. Be still. God is the one who makes war into peace, who breaks the bows and shatters the spears that people would use against us. Be still. Let God be exalted in your life, because the direction that all things are going is that eventually God is going to be exalted in every place. You know that we worship a God of peace? And when you draw closer and closer to a God who is so peaceful, that should result in more peace in your life. Does that make sense? When you're surrounding yourself with one who is entirely peaceful, peace should be the thing that results in your experiences. The more we get caught up in the mission of God, the more we dedicate our lives to God's service, the more it becomes true that my battles are actually God's battles. And you know what? God is going to fight those with us and often for us. We need only to be still and to stay close to him. I think the wilderness that the Israelites are in can serve as a good metaphor for much of our lives. Waiting, wilderness, these are things that we don't enjoy, but they are not things that are without purpose. We experience many of the feelings that the Israelites must have felt at some point. You know, at the time, they don't have Scripture because Moses is the one who wrote down the first 5 books of the Old Testament, including this one that we're reading, the book of Exodus. So at the time, they're not able to carry Scripture with them, but what they carry are the bones of Joseph. You know, that ancestor from the past. And to some extent, we carry Scripture with us today. And we might remember that, well, I know God was faithful to those people. I read those stories, and I know God was faithful at those times. But sometimes it's hard to be courageous and to have faith that, you know, God was faithful then. He's still going to be faithful now. He fought their battles for them. You know, he is still going to fight my battles for me if I just thoroughly continue to cling to him. We have to keep hanging on to those bones of Joseph, to the great stories of what God has done. And that is one thing we can carry with us into the unknown. They did have to remain in the wilderness. I can't imagine the conversation between parents and kids on that road. Dad, where are we going? I'm not sure. Mom, how long till we get there? I have no idea. Well, when are we going to get there? I don't know. What are we going to eat? I'm not sure. You know, you don't have any answers to any of those questions. It's hard to be in a place of wilderness where you don't really know how to answer the basic questions of what in my life is about to happen? What is this new thing that's popped up? How am I going to solve it? What are we going to do about it? And they did have threats looming. Now, for them, that took the form of at least 600 chariots with Egyptian soldiers, but we've all got our own things that pursue us and give us stress and anxiety. Maybe it's a chaotic workplace that you're dealing with, and some sorts of social chaos that are wreaking havoc in your life. Maybe it's emotional chaos within your family where things are just not going well and you can't seem to find a solution to your problems. Maybe you're dealing with physical chaos in your body and you've gotten bad news from the doctor about some growth or some unexpected problem and you're not quite sure yet what you're going to do about it. There are always things in our life that feel threatening to us, sometimes worse than others. But it is in these kinds of situations where especially God invites us to be still and to know that He is God and He is the one who is in control. And it is often in these hard circumstances especially that God can teach us the most about Himself. Generally speaking, I think if I were to ask a brainy type person to tell me about God, a lot of people like to fixate on some of the things God can do, right? So tell me about God. Well, God is omniscient. He knows everything. God is omnipotent. He can do anything. God is omnipresent. God is everywhere all the time. Those are the qualities we tend to fixate on. But you know, when you read Scripture and you read some of the people who came to know God really intimately, some of the prophets, some of the leaders, some of the people who just really went through hardship with God, you know the traits of God they want to talk about the most? They want to talk about His loving kindness and His mercy. A couple of months ago, we were talking about the book of Lamentations, just the absolute worst thing that could possibly ever happen in their history. They lost the promised land, the temples burned to the ground, and the book of Lamentations is just so despairing. But there in the middle of the book is that beautiful passage, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. It's the loving kindness of God, it's His mercy that in our worst moments we come to realize those things run even deeper than our fears, and God's kindness to us runs so much deeper than our obedience deserves. In reflecting on kindness, just how valuable it is to us, especially in our dark hours, I was reminded of this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. A couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting her at a conference that I was attending. Naomi, she lives in San Antonio. She's a good Texas girl, had a fascinating upbringing. But she writes poetry, and her poem about kindness is one of the most downloaded in the last several years. It's become very popular. In fact, I believe Bono uses it at U2 concerts and stuff. It's a really well-known poem at this point. But she talked to our group, and she told us the story of how she wrote this poem. She said it came at one of the worst moments in her life. She and her husband had been married for a week, and they were on their honeymoon. They had just gotten married, they were excited, they'd saved up, and they were going to spend an extended time traveling in South America. They had really, budgeted out their finances and their time where they were going to be able to stay for a pretty long time and go on this grand adventure. And about a week into this, after they'd been married, they were riding a bus, and there was a terrible robbery on their bus. These people came on, they were armed, they took everything that they had. This newlywed couple down in a place where they don't even speak the language. They have got no forms of identification, no money, no idea where they're going to spend the night. They don't know how to ask for help. They're in this terrible moment. And even worse than that, there's an Indian man who got murdered in the process of the robbery. There's one dude that they just flat killed and left laying there on the ground. So they've gone through this horrible, horrible, traumatic experience. They have no idea what they're going to do next. Again, just been married for a week. And as they're there in South America, she talked about how despairing she was. And then suddenly, as they're walking off of the bus and they're walking over to another place, there was this local man, and they only spoke broken Spanish, but as he talked to them, she talked about the way that he looked deeply into their eyes, and they started trying to explain what they'd just seen and what had happened. And she said, I just looked, and his eyes got so sad for me, and he kept saying to me in Spanish, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I want to help you. And she spoke about his kindness. And as her husband went off to try and get some sort of traveler's checks or something just to get them by, she sat down and she said, it's almost like this poem just came to her. She sat down and wrote this out. I'm going to read it to you. She said, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop, the passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans in the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. It's in those confusing and often dark places that we come to truly appreciate the loving kindness of God. That in our moments of greatest stress, we do have a presence in our life. You see, the issue with spirituality, the fundamental issue of spirituality, it's not whether or not God is there for you. Like, that is a total non-issue. It is never an issue whether or not God is there. It is a huge issue whether or not you're willing to make the space in your life to be aware of His presence and to nurture that relationship in your life. That's the critical issue. One of my favorite words in recent years is the word flourish. I like that word and I like what it means, to flourish. It's what I want to personally strive to do in my life. I want to be a flourishing person. It's what I would wish for our congregation. I want us to be a flourishing church. It's what I would wish for you personally, for you, for your family. I'd want to see you flourish in your life. I do love Landon Saunders' definition of a flourishing life. He says a flourishing life is a life that loves to happen. Isn't that a great definition? Isn't that what you want for yourself? I want for my life to just enjoy happening. Life itself to be like a gift every day that somehow, even with the ups and the downs, it's good that this is another day that happened. God can certainly reach us through the stressful times in our lives, but we also have the ability to choose to know God freely. You don't have to wait until you're in a moment of great stress or tragedy to choose that you're going to open yourself up more in your life to God. So my question for you would be, where are the margins in your life where this can occur? A sheet of paper, if you were to look at a sheet of paper in your songbook or whatever, if you think about something that has text edge to edge where there's no room for notes, no room for corrections, no room for thoughts, if everything in your life is always edge to edge, it's just hard to digest. It's hard to deal with. There's no place to breathe. You can't really make sense of a piece of paper when you don't have some margins around the sides to let you grasp what it is that you're looking at. And when it comes to your life, basically you got two building blocks for this. You got time and you've got space, right? Those are the only two things you really have. You've got what time you've been given by God, and you've got what space you occupy. So I want to invite you to think about where in your life are these margins where you are taking time, making space to be still so that God can come near, so that you can be aware of God and make space for God. Think about your schedule. What parts of your schedule have you charted out and said, these belong only to God and to the things of higher purposes? Because God is not just the God of a couple of hours every Sunday morning. God is really the God of all parts of your life. Where are the times in your life that God gets to reign beyond just Sunday morning worship time? I wonder about those places in your life where maybe you've given into the temptation to make compromises. Maybe you made some kind of negotiation with God and said, well, God, I'm just going to keep working a lot of overtime right now because here's this thing I really want, or here's this way I need to prove myself, or here's this thing I need to get. I wonder, a few months down the road, as you look at some of those compromises you've made, are you really as tough as you thought you were? Is your body responding with as much energy as you hoped that it would? Are you still feeling alive spiritually like you told yourself you would if you just took a break for a little while? Where is it that you're finding time to be still and let God be God and to let God fight your battles? What about the spaces in your life where you best connect with God? Each of us kind of has our own spaces that we really feel most comfortable in prayer. For some of you, that might be a early morning cup of coffee. Maybe it's a place that you like to go somewhere nearby where there's natural beauty that you enjoy. Maybe it's certain people that you just love being with who nourish your soul. But where are the spaces in your life where you are taking time to be still and to remember your relationship to God? My encouragement to each of us would be to think about your life and to try and allow prayer to become like a punctuation in your life's story. If you were to rewrite the story of your day and your life were being told as a book, there would certainly be many sentences and they would end with different kinds of punctuations, just like our life experiences. Sometimes there's just a period and a statement of what's happened. Sometimes maybe there's an exclamation point of something exciting or maybe something frightening, or maybe certain things happen and you just leave yourself kind of questioning, not sure what's supposed to happen next. What if you tried to work prayer into every one of those places in your life that you'd otherwise just be putting a punctuation mark? God, here's the thing that's going on today. God, here's the thing that I'm really concerned about. God, here's the thing that I'm super happy about, and I want to give you credit for weaving that thing together for me. God, here are some questions I have, but I'm going to trust you to help fight my battles for me because I don't see the solution to this one. What if you tried to work prayer in as a punctuation to everything that you experience? Whatever it is that you're going through in your life, stress can be a good alarm clock. When you reach the end of your rope, sometimes those situations help us to wake up a little bit and to realize we've become unbalanced. And maybe you're one of the people here who's at that moment where you know it's time to do something different. But maybe you're a person where things are seeming to go reasonably well, but you know you're just not as aligned as well as you could be. You know, you can freely choose what you're going to do with your time, where you're going to place yourself in space, what it is that you're going to be doing. And I just invite you to think about whether or not you're aligning your life in such a way that God can be best glorified and that you can walk with Him most closely.